Have you ever wondered why your beautiful strategies fail? You build a perfect strategy, but the moment execution starts, everything collapses. Or wonder why big companies can't seem to change course? The new goals are so obvious, but it seems like they refuse to budge. Why is that? By using the automated battles of Guildrun, we can see how simple rules automatically fix bad habits in your businesses and keep them fixed. Your company says quality comes first. Then it pays people for speed. Employees learn the real strategy from the consequences. Leaders keep repeating the official strategy and wonder why nobody follows it. So how can we make sense of what's happening here? As per usual, we look at games to understand reality. In this video, we're going to use Guildrun as our analogy, with gameplay footage generously provided by our friends' gaming channel, Head-Click Gaming. Guildrun is a single-player PvE auto-battler roguelike where you recruit heroes, choose their specializations, arrange the formations, and combine items and relics. Once combat starts, the board carries out the rules of the game. That makes Guildrun a clean way to ask a management question. How do you get strategy implemented without standing over every employee and correcting every decision? Let's start with a common Guildrun failure. Here, Head-Click's team reaches a difficult encounter and collapses. Every hero looks individually useful. He has damage, he has shields, he has class tags that appear to fit together. The result is still a loss. My first instinct would be to rebuild everything. Replace 2 heroes, spread ranks across the roster, buy the highest rarity relic, move every unit. Then run the fight again and hope the screen looks different. Sometimes rebuilding everything from the ground up is the right decision. Rebuilding an entire organization is usually not an option that is available to all of us. Even in-game, it isn't really a good option either. So we need to have other tools that we can use. That isn't the only problem though. Conceptually, we run into a different problem. If we want to exchange an existing roster or change an existing organization, we need to understand the rules of that game or organization in order to know which changes are going to give us the results we want. So what are the rules of the game, or the rules of that organization? We turn to Ludwig von Bertalanffy, the father of systems thinking, to give us the lay of the land. Ludwig von Bertalanffy's general system theory argues that an organization cannot be understood by examining each department, process, or employee in isolation. Every part is connected, and changing one element alters pressures elsewhere in the system. Organizations are open systems as organized wholes maintained through ongoing exchange with their environment. The parts matter, but their relationships help produce the behavior of the whole. Company is open to customer, suppliers, labor, regulation, cash information, and changing demand. People leave and arrive, orders move, budgets change, yet the company can keep producing the same operating pattern. Systems tend to settle into a form of dynamic equilibrium. This does not mean the system is motionless. It means more that disturbances are often absorbed or counteracted so the overall pattern survives. The pattern is closer to a steady state than a static equilibrium. Nothing is motionless. People are working hard to keep that pattern alive. The system looks stable because hidden labor is absorbing the instability. This explains why large reforms frequently produce resistance or unintended consequences. A forceful intervention can destabilize useful relationships or push the system toward a worse equilibrium. This is where the Guildrun analogy works. A hero may appear to carry the team because another hero is feeding mana, a backup effect is adding stats, a formation is controlling first contact, and a relic is converting repeated triggers into sustain. Remove the visible carry, and of course the board collapses. But remove the invisible support, and the carry may collapse even faster. The first leadership task is to map these rules of the game before changing them. So how does Bertalanffy advise us to do this? Well, the first one's really simple. We look at the current state. Given enough time, every system will reach an equilibrium. So if we can understand the current state of an organization, we are already well underway. As a bonus benefit, this should be really easy to do. Keeping an eye on the current state of an organization is something that most organizations do, and if they don't, they should be. The second one is a bit more tricky. It's all about the interactions between departments or groups. The easiest one here is the way handoffs are dealt with. These tend to be formalized, so you have actual documentation to look at. But the trickier parts are information and feedback flows. Understanding these is going to be an entire episode on its own, so stay tuned for that one. The third one is probably the easiest of them all. What goes into the organization and what goes out. What goes in is the easiest. We've got sales for letting new clients in, we've got procurement for letting new stuff in, we've got talent acquisition to let new employees in. Pretty self-explanatory. Outflows are where this gets trickier, but only a little bit. They're just the inversion of the inflows. Why do clients leave? Why do employees leave? And why does stuff leave? Well, stuff leaves through breaking or obsolescence or unfortunately stealing. But I digress. Welcome to Tactical Mindscape. Here, we use games to explain leadership without the usual nonsense. If you want to improve your leadership knowledge through gaming, consider hyping, commenting, and subscribing, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another concept. There is one more boundary that I haven't discussed, and that is the one internal boundary that every company has: budgets. Fortunately, that one is also very easy, unless you're me. So we can now find the rules of the game. I would advise to start with boundaries because that will help you understand the current state of a company pretty quickly. The current state will help you understand the internal interactions more easily after that. However, you do you. There is no good or bad way to find out the rules of the game. Now that we have a grasp of the rules of the game, we can look to change it. As you can see, even simply understanding the rules of the game is already quite complex, even for small companies. So we want to look for small, well-placed changes that alter feedback loops or constraints. The objective is to shift how the system naturally behaves, rather than continuously forcing individual people to behave differently. So why do we want to look for a small change? Well, the smallest intervention that is structurally sufficient means the least amount of work. Hooray! It needs to be small enough that we can still tell what caused the change and understand the consequences, so we can backtrack if necessary. It needs to be strong enough that the old pattern cannot simply absorb it. Let me warn you though, Bertalanffy does not prove that small changes are always superior. Some systems need more capacity, a different goal, or a structural rebuild. That is the difference between tuning a leverage point and facing the kind of network redesign we discussed in the Frostpunk Mini Motorways episode. Once we can see the system, we need to decide where to intervene. That is where Jim Collins becomes useful. Jim Collins uses the term catalytic mechanisms for concrete rules or structures that force an organization to act on its ambitions. A vision statement says what the organization values. A catalytic mechanism changes what people are actually permitted, required, or rewarded to do. These mechanisms are more specific than a policy, metric, or value statement. A real mechanism produces an ongoing effect. It distributes power toward people who can affect the outcome. It allows useful local adaptation. Collins also argued that it exposes people or practices that fundamentally reject the organization's stated values. These mechanisms are usually simple, difficult to ignore, and built directly into the operating system of the organization. For example, a company that claims to prioritize customer satisfaction might give employees the authority to issue refunds without managerial approval. That rule converts an abstract value into repeatable behavior. Collins argues that effective catalytic mechanisms distribute power, impose clear constraints, and create consequences for people who resist the organization's core purpose. They also work continuously, rather than depending on a leader repeatedly reminding everyone what matters. The central lesson is that strategy becomes credible when it is hardwired into decisions, incentives, and procedures. Leaders should therefore ask, what small rule would make the desired behavior easier, automatic, or unavoidable? The principle is that the stated priority becomes connected to a consequence. This distinction separates a catalytic mechanism from ordinary management furniture. A KPI records something. It becomes structurally consequential only when the result changes a decision and when the measure is protected against obvious gaming of that metric. A procedure tells people how to act. It becomes catalytic only when it changes the authority, visibility, or continuation condition around the work. An incentive change is a payoff. It can create powerful behavior, but a narrow incentive can erase everything the scorecard doesn't count. You will be able to see the consequences directly. Does the mechanism recur during normal work? Can the person closest to the consequences use it? What happens when somebody ignores it? If the answer is another meeting, well, the mechanism is not going to yield the results you're hoping for. Let's see what that looks like in Guildrun. In Guildrun, a relic acts as a hardwired administrative rule. For instance, here head-click equips a relic that generates team-wide shields every time a shard is generated, completely altering unit behavior without requiring him to manually command anyone. It's a non-negotiable structural rule that shifts the baseline behavior of the whole squad. The mechanism doesn't instruct each unit to care more. It changes what their existing actions produce. They will generate a shield every time a shard is generated. That is also why catalytic mechanisms can be dangerous, and let's be honest, that's why people fail in games like Guildrun. Well, at least I do. Introduce the wrong mechanism, and it's game over. A proper mechanism will move behavior. Where it moves to is the big question. It may move behavior toward a proxy, hide a capacity problem, or transfer the cost to someone with less power. And just because your change moves doesn't mean it'll move in the right direction. And it's all good and nice that we now know how to move your organization. At least your strategy is no longer a paper tiger. But we do want to make sure that it moves in the right direction. As an example, Wells Fargo introduced sales pressure and changed behavior at an enormous scale. Targets, scorecards, and incentive pressure helped create conditions in which unauthorized accounts became widespread. The reported number moved while the customer outcome deteriorated. So, how do we know which interventions we can do and what they will lead to? This is the point where Peter Senge becomes necessary. Collins helps us design force. Senge helps us ask where that force travels. Peter Senge argues that organizations are shaped by feedback loops, chains of cause and effect in which actions eventually circle back to influence the original situation. Some loops are reinforcing, meaning they amplify change, while others are balancing, meaning they resist change and push the system back towards stability. A feedback loop is a circular chain in which an effect returns to influence its own cause. A reinforcing loop amplifies movement. Balancing loop resists movement or pushes the system toward a limit. Reinforcing does not mean good, and balancing does not mean bad. For example, improved service may create better reviews, which attract more customers, which generate more revenue to improve service further. That is a reinforcing loop. By contrast, rapid growth may overload staff, reduce quality, and slow future growth. That is a balancing loop. We need to understand this to understand Senge's system archetypes. That's what we are after here. Senge describes system archetypes, common patterns that appear across different organizations. His book, The Fifth Discipline, presents 9 principal archetypes. Archetype number 1, balancing process with delay. People take corrective action, but the results arrive slowly. Because they cannot yet see the effect, they overreact, reverse course, or abandon the intervention, producing instability and oscillation. In Guildrun, your guild setup achieves a massive win streak, but higher stages require upgrading your bench capacity. Expecting the current strategy to hold forever, you skip bench upgrades for raw damage stats, causing your synergy to collapse when enemy types change. In an organization, this might look like demand for a company's SAS platform surging, but leadership delays investing in server infrastructure to maximize short-term profit margins. System latency spikes, performance degrades, and churn rises, leading executives to incorrectly conclude that market demand is falling. Archetype 2, limits to growth. A reinforcing loop initially generates rapid improvement, but growth eventually encounters a limiting constraint such as capacity, skills, resources, or demand. Pushing harder on growth accomplishes little unless the constraint is removed. Guildrun terms, this might look like focusing all early shards on leveling a single high-tier assassin, letting you steamroll early combat rounds. Soon, you hit higher-tier AoE waves that instantly burst down a single hero, stalling your progression because your team lacks broad synergy. In an organization, this will look like a tech startup scaling rapidly by relying on aggressive sales tactics and a lean support system. Eventually, customer service becomes overwhelmed, response times plummet, and negative reviews halt new customer acquisition despite heavy marketing spend. Archetype 3, shifting the burden. A quick symptomatic solution relieves the immediate problem, reducing pressure to address its underlying cause. However, repeated use gradually weakens the organization's ability to implement the fundamental solution. In Guildrun, when stuck on a hard stage, you consume rare consumable boosts instead of restructuring your class synergies. You clear the level, but your underlying team build remains flawed, leaving you completely helpless when the temporary items run out. In an organization, a software team repeatedly relies on manual hotfixes and emergency patches to hide systemic code defects. Because the quick fixes work, leadership never insists on refactoring the core architecture, making the underlying platform increasingly fragile over time. Archetype 4, eroding goals. When performance falls below the desired standard, leaders close the gap by lowering the standard rather than improving performance. Temporary exceptions gradually become the new normal. In Guildrun, you set a goal to maintain a pure S-rank class comp, but run low on shards to refresh the shop. Instead of adapting your resource economy, you lower your target to B-rank units, leaving your final squad unprepared for endgame boss mechanics. In organization terms, let's say a department struggles to meet its 98% customer satisfaction target due to understaffing. Rather than addressing workload issues or hiring, management, in its infinite wisdom, quietly adjusts the acceptable threshold down to 85% to make current performance look successful on paper. Archetype number 5, escalation. Two parties judge success relative to each other. Each side's defensive action threatens the other, creating an accelerating cycle such as an arms race, price war, or internal competition. So in Guildrun, this is like facing high damage enemy waves. You put all your resources into defensive shields. The AI's scaling and rage mechanics push back with higher damage output, forcing you to invest even more into defense until, well, your team runs out of time and loses. In an organization, this could be like two competing product teams constantly expanding their feature roadmaps to win higher quarterly budget allocations from leadership. This endless feature war dilutes both products' core quality and exhausts shared engineering resources without adding customer value. Archetype 6, Success to the Successful. Two activities compete for limited resources. Early success attracts more support, causing the favored activity to improve while the neglected activity becomes increasingly unable to compete. In Guildrun, your frontline paladin gets an early relic drop, making him survive longer and steal most of the combat XP. Because he gets all the rewards, your off-tank falls behind in stats and becomes a useless slot on the board. Organization, a manager allocates all high-value client accounts and travel budgets to her top-performing senior employee. The senior rep continues to thrive, while junior team members are starved of development opportunities and eventually resign due to lack of growth. And if you watched our Heroes of Might and Magic episode, you'll remember that if you haven't set your juniors up for success, you're in quite the hole if your superstar leaves. Archetype 7, Tragedy of the Commons. Individuals benefit from using a shared resource, but the cumulative effect of everyone maximizing their own use depletes or overwhelms that resource. Examples include shared staff, budgets, production capacity, or natural resources. In Guildrun, imagine for a moment if every character had a shared mana pool. Without cooldown management, your heavy-cost DPS units drain the entire pool, preventing your healer from casting a critical survival skill when the squad is low. In organizational terms, multiple autonomous product divisions heavily query a central shared database to power their real-time analytic dashboards. As every team increases their request frequency for short-term gain, the shared server crashes, halting operations across the entire company. Archetype 8, the fixes that fail. A solution improves conditions in the short term but creates delayed consequences that make the original problem worse. The worsening problem then encourages even greater use of the same failed fix. And in Guildrun, you keep losing rift fights to heavy boss damage, so you stack all gear on your main tank for quick survival. However, this starves your backline damage dealers, causing fights to drag out until the boss eventually enrages and wipes the squad. In organization terms, let's say a project misses its deadline, so leadership mandates mandatory weekend overtime to catch up immediately, or crunch time. The temporary speed boost leads to severe employee burnout and costly quality bugs, creating even worse delays on the next deliverable. And Archetype 9, Growth and Underinvestment. Growth creates demand for additional capacity, but leaders delay investment because current performance appears inadequate or resources seem scarce. The resulting capacity shortage damages performance, seemingly confirming that investment was unjustified. The practical lesson is that leaders should stop treating problems as isolated events. They should map the loop producing the behavior, identify delays and unintended consequences, and intervene at the point where a small structural change can reshape the entire pattern. This gives us a practical sequence. Map the current system, diagnose the recurring loop or constraint, find a rule, information flow, resource flow, or authority boundary that influences many actions. Install a mechanism with teeth. Watch how the system adapts. Then retain, revise, or remove the mechanism based on evidence. That sequence is a tactical Mindscapes synthesis of Bertalanffy, Collins, Senge, and adjacent systems work. Now, I want to run that sequence inside Guildrun. So we go to Rex Plays. In Rex Plays, we create a safe sandbox for you to test out new concept through play, so you can confidently take what you learn into the real world. Here are 4 self-imposed constraints to run on your next play session of Guildrun to experience what it's like to do different types of intervention or no intervention at all. Rule 1, the freeze state. First, we find the boundaries of the system. We do not just learn what the rules of the game are, we also find out what the equilibrium is. In this case, how far do you go without intervention? So here's the constraint. For 3 consecutive rounds, you are forbidden from buying units, spending shards, or moving a single hero. Why it works? Well, it strips away your ability to use quick fixes. You're forced to watch the exact same engine run against escalating pressure, revealing your board's true equilibrium. Do you actually have a scaling synergy, or are you just outstatting weak enemies? We use this to experience what it's like to have limits to growth, eroding goals, and shifting the burden, because you can't use quick fixes, which makes you feel how dependent you are on them normally. Rule 2. Single variable tweaks. This makes you very cognizant of the changes you make. You're still not allowed to make temporary fixes. You shift from making incremental adjustments to implementing hardwired constraints that enforce a specific strategic outcome. So here's your constraint. Between rounds, you're allowed to make exactly one change. Change one hero, equip one item, or swap one unit. That's it. Why it works? Well, when a project fails in business, bad managers change 5 things at once and have no idea which one worked. Making a single tweak forces you to isolate cause and effect, showing you exactly how one small shift and a handoff changes the entire battle. We use this to experience fixes that fail in balancing process with delay. Rule 3. The 50% capital cap. We go back to boundaries and play with that boundary in mind. You can make multiple changes now, but you can never spend all of your money. You're forbidden from matching the enemy's stat type, meaning if the enemy scales physical damage, you cannot build armor or health. You must use control, dodge, or execution triggers. So the constraint is you must keep half your total income in reserve at all times. You can never spend down to 0. So why this works? You can't rely on rolling the shop until luck saves you. Operating under strict capital constraint forces you to find high leverage moves, investing only in items or class triggers that fundamentally alter the rules for your whole team. We use this to experience growth and underinvestment and escalation. That last one might need some explanation. Escalation tricks you into thinking you're solving a problem when you're actually just matching pressure with pressure. Like a boss has high burst damage, so you stack armor and shields. To break the spiral, you have to stop countering power with power and change the structural rules of engagement entirely. The rule forces you to do just that. Rule 4. The zero inflow run. So here's the constraint. Once you hit stage 2, you're banned from recruiting new heroes. You can only win using relics, positioning, and skill triggers on your existing board. So why this example works? In the real world, you can't just hire your way out of a broken process. Lord knows I've tried. Closing the recruitment pipeline forces you to stop blaming your team's talent and start optimizing the internal feedback loops that make or break a performance. The ultimate practice test: combine Rule 1 and Rule 2. Watch your squad fail without touching anything, write down the exact second the system breaks, and fix it using only a structural tweak. This allows us to experience tragedy of the commons, escalation, and success to the successful. I haven't explained all of the reasons why the archetypes work for these rules. Some of these rules make the systemic pattern obvious right away. But if one of them feels tricky or you're not seeing how a specific rule triggers an archetype in Guildrun, drop a comment below and I'll break it down for you. So the main goal of these rules is not to copy the relic or the exact loop. What I want you to take away from playing this way is the diagnostic discipline. Understand how mechanisms work in Guildrun and then apply them in other games. And remember, a mechanism is an instrument, not a monument to the leader who installed it. So change it when necessary. But try not to get married to the mechanism, especially when the seasons change. Commitment to the goal does not require loyalty to a failed mechanism. This is the central idea. Strategies become real when they enter the rules that govern recurring decisions. Bertalanffy helps us see why the same failure returns even when the people change. The behavior belongs partly to the relationship among roles, information, authority, resources, and routines. Collins gives us a way to hardwire the priority. A catalytic mechanism has consequences, recurs through normal operations, and makes the strategy difficult to ignore. Senge keeps the intervention honest. He makes us trace reinforcement, resistance, delay, gaming, and the next constraint. Guildrun makes all of this legible because the board acts after we set the conditions. Kai does not need another speech. Gustav does not need another reminder. Grace changes what shielding produces, and the rest of the build responds. That's why this analogy works. Implementation is changing the trigger, the payoff, the information flow, the authority, or the resource rule that shapes what people repeatedly do. It's not repeating the command louder. Then you watch what the system learns. Because the strongest mechanism in the wrong place will implement the wrong strategy perfectly. Ultimately, a strategy becomes real when the way work is set up makes people act on it without the boss repeating the same order every day. I'd like to take the time to thank the Guildrun subreddit, HeadClick Gaming for providing the gaming footage, and the Discord where we discuss these topics before they go live. Please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you found any value in this video. If you're interested in a deeper dive on structural changes gone wrong, the video, The KPI Trap When Metrics Start Managing You, is perfect for you. We'll see you next week with new insights and games here on Tactical Mindscapes. Thanks for watching.